With the recent release of the Peaky Blinders film, I'm going to be looking back and breaking down all the episodes of Peaky Blinders, starting at Season 1, Episode 1. But I'm going to be making a video for all 36 episodes of the series one by one. I'm going to be breaking down the episodes scene by scene, discussing all the hidden details, the plot, the character, and reviewing each episode. So the Peaky Blinders is written by Stephen Knight, who wrote all 6 episodes of Season 1 himself. Stephen Knight is a British writer and filmmaker, popular for writing Dirty Little Things and Eastern Promises. Knight later reveals the idea for the show came from stories his parents told him when growing up about gangs in Birmingham. His father reportedly said, "Your uncles used to run betting shops and the Peaky Blinders would walk in dressed in suits." But although the Peaky Blinders are based on a real-life gang, a lot of what happens in the show is fictional and sometimes exaggerated. Throughout the show, there are characters and events that are based on real life, but there are also parts that are completely made up for the purpose of the show. The first season was set to release on the 12th of September 2013 on BBC Two, and although Cillian Murphy was already an established actor, appearing in Batman Begins, Inception and 28 Days Later, in my opinion it was Peaky Blinders that really blew up his acting career, which then led him on to do bigger projects like Oppenheimer. At the start, the show wasn't really predicted to be a big show and wasn't really massively anticipated. The show organically grew as each season went on and expanded rapidly once it was uploaded on Netflix. Peaky Blinders is set in Small Heath, Birmingham, and the first episode is set in 1919. Now, the real Peaky Blinders was said to have been active in the years 1880 to 1900. However, one of the key themes of Peaky Blinders is that it takes place after World War One, where a lot of the main characters have trauma and there is a lot of poverty in Birmingham. The first scene of the episode, we see Tommy Shelby riding a horse through Birmingham. Stephen Knight originally said that Tommy Shelby was written specifically for Cillian Murphy. Murphy originally worried he didn't look physically intimidating enough to play the character, but Knight insisted he believed Murphy had the intelligence and intensity Tommy needed. We see the area where he is riding is deserted, and then we see a Chinese woman come up to the horse and blow powder onto the horse. Tommy then tells everyone who's hiding in the houses around that the horse names is Monaghan Boy, Kempton, 3 o'clock Monday. And what Tommy did here was put a spell on the horse to fix the horse race and essentially tell the locals the race so they could bet on it. Tommy runs a betting shop and later reveals his strategy was that if the horse won the race, next time the horse ran, the whole of Birmingham would bet on the race, and then the time after that the horse would lose and Tommy would keep all the bets people made. After this short scene, the iconic Peaky Blinders soundtrack started playing as Tommy rides his horse through the rest of Birmingham. Knight said he wrote the first scene to be similar to a western where someone enters on a horse while people watch in silence and the rider doesn't speak. The western feel definitely matches the soundtrack, which is Red Right Hand by Nick Cave and The Bad Seeds that was produced in 1994. We see him riding through the slums of Small Heath. He rides through an industrial looking scrapyard and a canal, which we later learn Tommy's uncle owns. We see a preacher, Jeremiah, played by the late Benjamin Zafani. We see lots of working class people running around, working, pulling carts, carrying things and doing a lot of manual work as Tommy rides through them. We see a group of blind people that Tommy gives change to. Tommy throughout the season always gives money to people lesser than him. It wasn't necessarily because he was kind, it was because he knew giving back to people less fortunate than him was always a good look. We then see him ride past the famous Garrison Tavern pub on Garrison Lane. As a whole, I think this scene was set up to establish Tommy as an authoritative figure in his local area. He's the only one in these shots wearing a suit, and most people are wearing run-down clothes and seem to be doing a lot of manual work. Many people greeted him as he was riding through the streets on his horse, and even the police said "Morning, Mr. Shelby" to him. Birmingham isn't a very popular city, and most UK dramas tend to be filmed in London, so it was one of the first times we saw Birmingham in 1919 on TV. One key feature I do like is that when everyone was greeting Tommy, he didn't speak at all and would usually just nod in response. This straight away painted Tommy as more of an authoritative figure in his local area. We then see Tommy walking down Waterville Lane into his family home and betting shop. He walks in and sees his little brother Finn, Shelby, smoking a cigarette before throwing it into the fire. He then walks into the betting shop, which is part of his house. This looks like a typical backstreet betting shop in 1919. Judging by the look of the shop, it was originally a house and had the walls knocked down to create the betting shop. This will be because backstreet betting was frowned upon by the law, and from the outside looking in, it looks like a regular house and is disguised. I actually have a map of the betting shop that I'm displaying on screen here, and as you can see it was both a shop and a house at the same time. The shop was really busy, showing that the Peaky Blinders already had a somewhat successful business. However, they were more of backstreet businessmen, which is probably why they had their home and shop in the same place. In the betting shop, we can see money, betting slips, and chalk on the board, which is usually to display the horse racing odds. In this scene, we get introduced to John Shelby, Tommy's younger brother, played by actor Joe Cole, who calls Tommy over to tell him there had been an increase of bets on Monaco Boy, the horse we saw at the beginning. We do learn later Tommy has a soft spot for horses, so it makes sense that he owns a betting shop. While in the betting shop, we get introduced to Arthur Shelby, played by Paul Anderson, who was the oldest of the Shelby brothers. Arthur's known for wearing a bow tie, and unlike Tommy, is less of a strategist and more so acts as Tommy's right-hand man and enforcer to the family. Arthur was meant to be the main leader of the show originally, but during development, the writers realised Tommy was more of an interesting character, so the focus shifted to him. Normally, during family gangs and businesses, age relates to the hierarchy, and it's usually the oldest that is in charge. That's why on surface level, many people assume Arthur's the leader. We see Arthur pour a glass of whiskey, which is very common throughout Peaky Blinders. Whiskey was a casual thing to help with trauma, and was also a popular habit and part of the gangster lifestyle, so all the Peaky Blinders were heavy drinkers. Arthur starts to grill Tommy on the fact that he did the powder trick with the horse, and doesn't agree with him getting involved with Chinese or fixing races. But Tommy responds by saying, "We agreed, I'm taking charge of drumming up new money." Tommy then leaves the conversation by saying, "I think so, you don't have to." I think this conversation shows Tommy and Arthur's relationship perfectly. Throughout the seasons, they have friction in their relationship. Tommy is a strategist and is always looking to take risks to grow the business, and he often does this without consulting his family and usually brings them in after, and this scene was a perfect example of this. Tommy is the smart one in the family, whereas Arthur acts as more of the brute force and doesn't necessarily lead the growth of the business. Even when Arthur is getting angry in the scene, Tom is staying calm, showing the difference in mannerisms between them both. And even after this conversation, Tommy doesn't reveal his full plans to Arthur, and he ends up walking off. We then cut to a scene from Major Campbell, who is the main antagonist in Season 1. We see him on a train looking at a file titled Specialist Branch, BSA, Munitions Robbery, Prime Suspects. In there are files of Arthur and Tommy with their war photos. Underneath Arthur it says Gangster, Racketeer, Illegal Bookmaker and Leader of the Peaky Blinders. Under Tommy it says Racketeering, Armed Robbery and Honoured with the King's Medal for Gallantry. Straight away this makes Major Campbell focus his efforts on Arthur. There's no dialogue in the scene, but Major Campbell has been sent to Birmingham to investigate who stole guns from the BSA factory, and we know he has his eyes on Tommy and Arthur's suspects. He also has a picture of communist agitator Freddie Thorne, who was a comrade to Tommy's. We then cut to a scene of character Freddie Thorne. Freddie is a member of the Communist Party of Great Britain and believes in overthrowing the capitalist system. After World War I, many working class people were unemployed, angry at the government, and inspired by the previous Russian Revolution. Freddie was a higher up in this revolution of the working class movement, and this is why the government sees him as a serious threat. We then cut to a scene in the Garrison pub, and Tommy enters the pub and makes eye contact with Freddie. Tommy doesn't speak, but his presence is definitely felt, as when he enters, everyone disperses and moves away from the bar. Freddie, however, comes to the bar to join Tommy, looks at his cap, which has razors in the peak, and calls it a crown of a prince. Razor blades in the caps are one of the things the Peaky Blinders were known for. Not just the razor blades, but in general, many people refer to flat peak caps as Peaky Blinders caps, as this was the iconic look in the series. They had razor blade in caps as a weapon. However, this was just fictional, and there wasn't much proof supporting that the real Peaky Blinders did this. I think this was a good addition, as it added to the idea of violence, and also matched the name Peaky Blinders. They used these to cut people's eyes, cut people's tongues, and were a hidden, more subtle weapon. In this scene, Freddie and Tommy have a very tense relationship. They were comrades in the war, and Freddie even saved Tommy's life at one point. But since returning, they have different beliefs. Freddie is a communist and believes that the working class should rise up and the capitalist system should be destroyed. However, Tom is quite the opposite. Instead of fighting the system, Tom is building a business, making money through other people gambling, and gaining power within the system. From Freddie's perspective, Tommy has become part of the problem, and Freddie sees Tommy's illegal bookmaking as taking money from poor workers. He believes gambling keeps working people trapped and desperate, while Tommy profits from it. Freddie even told Tommy that sometimes he wished he'd let Tommy take the bullet for him in France, and Tommy even replied, "There are nights I wish you had." Here he's referring to the trauma that he'd suffered with since the war, to the point where even sometimes at night he feels suicidal. Freddie's beliefs were also represented when he took the coin from Tommy to pay for his beer. This is because Freddie believes they are equal in the class system. You can even see here a subtle difference that Tommy's drinking whiskey, which is the more expensive drink, while Freddie's drinking beer, which is seen as the cheaper option. Danny Whizbang then bursts into the pub and starts flipping tables and going crazy. Danny suffers from shell shock, where he's severely traumatized from the war and is a comrade to Freddie and Tommy. However, the war affected Danny more. He tends to lose his mind and has manic episodes. This is how he gained the name Danny Whizbang. Freddie and Tommy work together to calm down Danny. This in itself shows how much the war has affected the lives of so many. Danny, Tommy and Freddie all have been deeply affected by the war. We then get introduced to Polly Gray, who plays a pivotal role in the Shelby organisation. She's the aunt of the brothers, treasurer of the company, but in some ways acts as a mother to them. This is the first time we see the entire family in one place during their family meeting. In this scene, we also get introduced to Ada Shelby, who's the sister, and Squidboat, who is the Peaky Blinders henchman. Family meetings and voting were a big part of the Peaky Blinders business. However, as much as they seemed useful, in this situation it never really helped. Arthur was leading the family meeting, but Tommy already knew the news he was announcing and generally didn't tell the family stuff if they didn't need to know. However, Polly and Tommy have a close relationship. Like Tommy, Polly is a strategist and is one of the only people Tommy will take advice from. Polly senses Tommy knows more and speaks to him privately in a church away from the family. Tommy then reveals, in an attempted robbery, his men picked up 25 Lewis machine guns from the BSA factory, which is why Major Campbell is coming to Birmingham to investigate the whereabouts of the guns. The BSA stands for Birmingham Small Arms Company. In the early 1900s, it was one of Britain's largest industrial manufacturers in Birmingham, and they mainly produced rifles, guns, ammunition, motorcycles and bicycles. The weapons Tommy accidentally steals are Lewis machine guns, and these were extremely powerful weapons at the time. They were used in World War I and can fire hundreds of rounds per minute. When there's so much revolution and rebellion going on, these guns could be a big threat to the British government in the wrong hands, which is why they sent Campbell down to retrieve them. During this time, the government feared revolution massively. There were communist revolutionaries, Irish rebels, criminal gangs. Polly pushes for Tommy to throw them in the canal straight away, or if he gets caught with them, he'll be hung. However, Tommy delays Polly's request by saying Charlie won't move contraband under a full moon. This is because I think it was seen as bad luck to do any criminal activity while there was a full moon out, and because they were gypsies, they were superstitious of these traditions. We then cut to a scene of Ada Shelby and Freddie Thorne, who have a secret relationship. This would cause tension within the family, as the Shelbys wouldn't approve of Ada being involved with Freddie, as he's a communist on the run, and it would bring problems to the family and the business. For now, they would keep their relationship hidden, but Ada even admits that one of the reasons she likes Freddie is because Freddie is one of the only people not scared of the Shelbys. We then cut to a scene of new character Grace walking towards the Garrison pub. Straight away, it's clear she's out of place. She's overdressed for the setting, wearing smart clothing, while walking through a industrial road. This immediately shows she isn't from the area and is out of her natural environment. It's worth noting that here she is dressed in green, which I think subtly is signalling her Irish background. When she arrives in the garrison, she expresses her interest in a job of being a barmaid, but the pub owner Harry tries to turn her away, saying she's too pretty. Ultimately, he's trying to do the right thing here. He sees that she doesn't fit the rough pub environment, and she would most likely get in trouble with men who are drunk. Grace convinces him to give her the job there by her singing ability, while showing she can clean by cleaning out some spittoons in the pub. Spittoons were containers placed around pubs and bars, and public places for people to spit tobacco or saliva. In the early 90s, many people chewed tobacco, smoked constantly, and spat frequently on the floor. We then see Major Campbell introduce himself to the local police force. He talks about all the crime the Peaky Blinders have committed, and partly blames the police for letting this happen. He even tells the officers at one point, "You are worse than them." The Peaky Blinders had significant influence over local police, and unlike today, the gang had officers on their payroll. Campbell then takes Arthur into a room to interrogate him and physically intimidate him. This catches Arthur by surprise, as even police officers wouldn't dare confront him in this way. During the confrontation, Campbell realises that Arthur doesn't know anything about the stolen guns, which redirects his investigation elsewhere. We then cut to a small but powerful scene in the Garrison pub. The pub is busy and Grace is serving customers. Tommy has a room in the garrison with a direct view of the bar. He opens the door and requests a bottle of rum. The pub owner tells Grace that whatever Tommy wants is on the house, but Tommy pauses for a moment when he sees Grace and says bluntly, "Are you a whore? If not, you're in the wrong place." The pub owner advises Grace to keep her head down. In this brief moment, Grace recognises Tommy's authority in the pub and that he behaves differently from the other people, while Tommy immediately senses that Grace doesn't belong in this environment. Later, it becomes clear that Grace has ulterior motives for being there, which explains her initial hesitation for first seeing Tommy. We then get a scene of Grace singing in the pub. Suddenly, Tommy walks in and everyone immediately stops singing, and Harry says to Tommy, "We haven't had singing in here since the war." And Tommy replies, "And why do you think that is?" Tommy's comment implies that after the war, the spirits of people were broke, and those that did survive were traumatised and had very little to sing or celebrate. We cut to another scene of Freddie and Ada together, and Freddie is trying to gather information from Ada about anything discussed in the family meeting regarding Major Campbell coming to the city. Being a committed communist, Freddie knows he's in danger and wants to learn as much as possible from Ada, but Ada's not really into politics and doesn't really want to act as a spy on behalf of Freddie in the family meetings. We then see Tommy alone in his bedroom smoking opium to cope with the trauma he went through in World War I. Opium is a powerful narcotic. It's commonly smoked using an opium pipe, and the effects mainly include relaxation, numbness, euphoria and drowsiness. In the early 90s, opium was more accessible and less strictly regulated than today. Tommy uses opium to deal with the trauma from the war, and in the show you can see it calms his mind and helps him sleep. However, Tommy still experiences nightmares of flashbacks to his time as a clay kicker in the war. Clay kickers dug tunnels underground towards enemy trenches, so explosives could be planted beneath them. This work was extremely dangerous and psychologically very brutal for anyone. It was arguably one of the worst positions in the war due to the harsh and terrifying environments. This scene gives a lot of backstory around Tommy. To this point, Tommy's been very quiet throughout all the scenes we've seen him at, but now we learn how deeply traumatised he actually is, to the point where he even struggles sleeping overnight. We then cut to another shot of Danny Whizbang, and it's early in the morning and he's on the verge of having another mental breakdown. He's wandering the streets and you can see him almost in a panic state, and he sits at a Italian cafe which is closed. The owner comes out and then tells him to leave, but Danny ignores the warning. The owner pulls out a knife and this fully triggers Danny. Danny ends up rushing towards the owner and stabbing him with his own knife, screaming, "Fix bayonets." Fix bayonets was a military order given to soldiers as a permission to attack in the war, so Danny obviously saw the cafe owner as an enemy in the war. Italians on the street witness this and want revenge. In organised crime, killing one of their members requires their retaliation, as they believed failing to respond would make them appear weak, encourage other gangs to challenge them, or damage their reputation. And this is a standard that many organised Italian gang families had. To restore honour, Danny's execution is demanded, so the Italians put in a request to Tommy to dispose of Danny. Tommy realises if he doesn't act, bigger consequences will follow, including Danny potentially being tortured or others being killed. Tommy doesn't want to kill Danny, so he stages his death and sends him to London. This scene shows Tommy using a canal boat to dispose of a body, and his uncle Charlie's scrapyard. We see another scene here of Major Campbell meeting Winston Churchill, who he's working for. At this time, Churchill is the Secretary of State. One small detail I like in this scene is Churchill complimenting Campbell's top hat, which is a nod to one of Churchill's later key iconic looks, where he's always in a suit and top hat. And you can see how much someone like Campbell's attitude shifts drastically, as it almost sucks up to Churchill, promising he will recover the guns no matter what, in comparison to the previous scene where he's talking down to other local police officers. There's a major contrast between how he acts to people above him in comparison to people below him, which is a major difference between someone like Campbell and someone like Tommy, who speaks to everyone pretty much in the same tone of voice. We then get a major reveal that Grace is working for Campbell. Her role in the garrison pub is to purely gather intelligence, to retrieve the stolen guns and find out who stole them. Grace then tells Campbell that Tommy Shelby is the leader of the Peaky Blinders, not Arthur. However, Grace does attempt to redirect Campbell's focus away from the Peaky Blinders towards the IRA. She has a deep grudge against the IRA because they murdered her father, who was previously a collaborator with Campbell. This sets up the main conflict of the season. The scene establishes the two major forces that will collide. On one side, the British government represented by Campbell, and on the other, the Peaky Blinders represented by Tommy Shelby. We don't actually see Campbell and Tommy meet in this episode, but that's going to be in episode 2. We then see Tommy back in Charlie's scrapyard, and he's changed the decision and actually wants to keep the guns now. He believes he can use the weapons to bribe Campbell into getting something from him. His uncle Charlie warns him about causing friction with Campbell, but Tommy says, "I heard he didn't serve." What it means is Major Campbell didn't serve in World War One, and this was seen as a cowardly thing. Just through knowing this, Tommy instantly has a lack of respect for him and definitely sees him as a coward or a lesser man as himself. In this scene here, we hear the first iconic line, "By order of the Peaky Blinders," which was spoken by Tommy towards his uncle. And finally, we see Tommy lie to Polly, telling her that he has disposed of the guns, again showing how Tommy keeps all his strategies and things close to his chest. This concludes episode 1 of the Peaky Blinders. I think the episode for me works on multiple levels. It establishes a clear theme showing life for a small gangster family after World War One, and the impact on Birmingham's working class communities. The plot is simple and clear surrounding the stolen guns that Tommy possesses, but I think the episode does a good job of setting up relationships and dynamics between characters. There are several one-on-one scenes such as Tommy and Polly, Tommy and Arthur, Tommy and Freddie, Freddie and Ada and more, which highlight different types of relationships and loyalties within the Shelby family. Tommy Shelby is obviously the clear focal point of the show, and I think Cillian Murphy delivers a really good performance, making the character mysterious, strategic and intense, even with relatively few lines. Storyline with Major Campbell and Grace also sets up central tension for the season. There's a clear conflict between the government and the Peaky Blinders, with Grace as a potential wild card. So overall, I think episode 1 is a well-rounded episode establishing the characters' relationship and introducing a strong plot.